Barak Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Neither Jew nor Greek. And pretty much this lesson is centered around, I guess you could say the Hellenization of Jake back then, but more so the Jakes that were in the Roman military. And this is a very important history to know, because if you don't know this history, you won't understand the reason why the Apostle Paul made statements like there's no difference between a Jew nor Greek. And you're thinking in the, regular mindset of people, you're thinking that it's talking about, the Israelites and the Greeks, so-called white people, but it's not. It's talking about the same people. Just one was being called Jews or Israelites. The other one was being called Greeks. And there's a whole vast history of that, which it touches on it, within the Old Testament, but it doesn't really go in depth. But when you go to the Apocrypha, especially the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, it goes into the whole history of what happened to the Israelites back then, and why they came to follow, worship, and even call themselves by Greek names. And this is why there's so much confusion when it comes to reading the New Testament, because most that read the New Testament and try to call themselves breaking it down don't understand the history of, the time of the Hellenization that took place during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which happened to be an Edomite that called himself a Greek, that ruled over the regions of Syria and that region there, and especially during his time, he really began the Hellenization of all people, which means that they were forcibly converting nations to follow the Greek customs and the Greek ways. All right, so what you're looking at before you here is a commercial where Blake Griffin, which is a basketball player, is playing Cornelius, a Roman centurion that we read about in the Bible, in the book of Acts, the 10th chapter and the 11th chapter. And pretty much Blake Griffin is a so-called black man. You could say a Judite, well, actually he's a Levite because his father is so-called Haitian. So he would be considered a Levite, so could Cornelius have been a Levite, a Judite, a Benjaminite? One of them, he had to be from the southern kingdom, because a lot of the how can I say it? A lot of the Israelites back then that were into those Greek customs were mostly, the southern kingdom, because the northern kingdom had already come to this side of the world. So you still had a sprinkle of Israelites among, the southern kingdom, but it was mostly the southern kingdom that was there, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, So it's interesting how they got a Jake to play the role of Cornelius, and somebody in the beginning of the commercial, they say Blake. He said no, Cornelius. So these devils know that the Israelites were Hellenized. They know that Cornelius was an Israelite. They know that Cornelius was a so-called black man. And they know a lot. The scriptures say that they are wiser than Daniel. There's no secret that they can hide from them. Now, this should be in the description box. Let's see, this should be in the description box. Nope, I didn't put it in the description box. So lock it for that. I usually do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. I mean, you could just type in Blake Griffin commercial and it should come up, but I'll put it here in case you want, to save it or download it or whatever the case may be. So what I want to do is deal with the issue of the Israelites being in the Roman armies, but not being recognized in history, and there was a reason why. So we have here something called, Sons of Israel in Caesar's service, right? That means the Israelites in the Roman military, Jewish soldiers in the Roman military. It says abstract. The participation of Roman Jewish soldiers in the armies of Imperial Rome often goes unrecognized. See, this is why people say, no, Cornelius, he was an Edomite. He was of the Italian band. First of all, you don't even know what the word Italian band means. The word Italian band means that pretty much he was just a member of the Roman military. That's all that means. This is mainly a result of lack of recognition on the part of scholars who wish to use rabbinic sources as the benchmark for Jewish practice in imperial age. And you have to understand that back then, whenever, even if you were an Israelite, whenever you would practice anything that had to do with the Greeks or the Romans, you were disowned. That was the cancel culture of the time. You were ostracized from that group. Anytime you didn't go along with the curriculum of the day, the Sanhedrin, which was the different groups, Israelite groups back then that were in the leadership positions, you were ostracized. You were apostatized. You were pretty much removed out of that circle. It says it is also difficult to identify Jewish soldiers, listen good, many of whom had what? Greek and Latin names. And this is why, as you hear Elder Apostle Tara go into, which we're going to get, Lord's will, in the book of Romans, especially the 16th chapter, all throughout the New Testament, you have men and women with Greek and Latin names that the Apostle Paul would give shouts out to because they were Israelites that just happened to have Greek and Latin names because of the great Hellenization period that took place approximately around about 200 years, about 150 years, or so, maybe a little more than that, 170 years prior to Yahushua coming on the scene. This is why the Apostle Paul said this. Let's see. Let's see if it comes up this way. See, the thing with the blue letters, if you don't say something exact, it won't, it won't give you like, it won't give you like a correction. Here we go, Galatians 3:28. So let's go to Galatians 3:28. You have to type it perfectly. You have to spell every word perfectly. And if not, then you won't find it. You have to go online to find it. All right, Galatians 3:28. It says, a matter of fact, I started 26. For ye are all the children of the Most High by faith in Yahushua, because Yahushua is the key that broke down that middle wall of partition, which were the divisions between the two. Actually, it started with the division or the separation of the Most High from us, Yasha'Allah, but it also ties into that middle wall of partition also ties into the differences between the tribes, and that great wall that was set up that separated the Jews that practiced, the law, statutes, commandments that were circumcised from the Jews that didn't practice, that were uncircumcised. And that's what the whole mystery is about. The mystery of the Gentiles is just that they're Israelites. They just became foreign. It says, for as many of you as have been baptized into Yahushua have put on Yahushua. There is neither Jew nor Greek. And this is one of the most misunderstood passages in the scriptures, because automatically they're thinking about Israelites and heathens. Well, the heathen part is heathens in a sense of Israelite heathens. You know, as we say, in a Gentile state of mind. All right. So when we go to 2nd Maccabees, the 6th chapter, you read the whole book of Maccabees, 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees. It gives you the whole history of the Hellenization that was taking place during the time of the Greeks, especially during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which was of the Seleucid line. You had 4 generals. There were more, but 4 primary generals, where the kingdom of the Greeks of Alexander the Greek was split up among. You know, you had Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. The 2 major kingdoms or dynasties that actually, you know, made more of an impact were the Ptolemaic dynasty and the Seleucid dynasty. Out of the Seleucid dynasty came the individual known as Antiochus Epiphanes, which was that wicked root, you know, which was that pretty much that demon that forcibly made Jake, you know, submit to the ways of the Greeks. You know, now you had some Israelites that spoke Greek, that knew they were Jews, that practiced the customs of Israel, you know, that still did, you know, everything. The only thing is that their language, there was a language barrier because they spoke Greek, but they were still practicing, you know, the law, statutes, commandments, you know, high holy days, so on and so forth. They would be considered the Hellenistas, which were Greek-speaking Jews. But then you had the Hellens, you know, which were the Israelites that didn't know they were Israelites. They spoke Greek, they followed the Greek customs, you know, they dressed like the Greek, they ate pork, all of that. You know, those were the ones that the Apostle Paul was speaking about coming back and being restored, being reconciled back to the Most High. So when we read 2nd Maccabees 6, we get an idea. You could read, like I said, the whole 1st and 2nd Maccabees. You'll get the whole history of what was going on. But here in 2nd Maccabees, it brings it together, because it says 2nd Maccabees 6:1, not long after this, the king, who was Antiochus Epiphanes, sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers. And this is what happened. This is what's called Hellenization, which were the customs of the Greeks being imposed and forced on other nations. And we happen to be caught up in that, right? It says, and not to live after the laws of the Most High. And that was this great separation. And the Jews in Jerusalem knew about this history because this history was fresh, you know, back then. So they understood the difference between the Jews and the Greeks being the Israelite foreigners. And they had nothing to do with them. You know, just like they knew the difference between the Hellenista, or the Greek-speaking Jews, that were still practicing the customs, and they were accepted, but they weren't fully accepted because of the language barrier. They kind of like would shun them, you know. So it says, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius, and that in Gerizim, right? Because in the Daniel's the 8th chapter, it said that these devils would set up, you know, or destroy and desecrate the temple. This is part of the prophecy of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwell in the place. For the coming of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, right? And that riot and reveling is what you would call today going to the clubs, partying at the clubs, you know? That was reveling, because it was a bunch of, you know, half drunk or fully drunk individuals men and women, partying till the early wee hours of the morning. In some cases, you had orgies that were going on at the same time. Men popping men, women popping women, men popping other, married women. All kind of foul shit was going on up in there. Just like it does in these so-called, clubs of today. That's that rioting, that chambering that the scripture spoke about. And this is what was going on back then. And they were doing it within the confines of the temple, because it was a great forsaking. That's why when Judas, Maccabees and them came into the picture and they destroyed those heathens out of there, they had to rededicate the temple. This is what Hanukkah is all about, which is the rededication or the dedication, of the temple. It had to be rededicated. It had to be stripped, cleansed, sanctified, and rebuilt. And that's what happened. And this is why we still celebrate it to this very day. It says, who dallied with harlots, see, and they dallied with harlots because they were having sex in the temple. You had something known as prostitute or temple prostitutes, which the pagan religions all have their form of sexual rites, where they'll have, different days of the year, their high satanic days, where they'll have, sex in the name of their God. This is what was happening in the book. I believe that was Numbers, the 25th chapter. It was either the Moabite women or the Midianite women that Jake was dealing with in the name of their God. And this is why Phinehas put the Jake man and the heathen woman to death, because he was having sex, not because he was having sex with a heathen woman, but because of the occasion of it. It was because they were doing it in the name of their God. And this is something that was going on back then. This is why the Lord said, learn not the way of the heathen. It says, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places. Right. It's nothing to do. The Lord wasn't angry because Jake was dealing with heathen women. He was angry because they followed their customs. It says, and besides that, brought in things that were not lawful, like pork. It says the altar also was filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth, right, which are unclean meats. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts. It says fast here, but it's really feast when you read the book form, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So if you couldn't profess yourself at all to be a Jew, what did you have to profess yourself or call yourself? It wasn't American, because America didn't exist back then. It wasn't British. Britain didn't exist back then. It wasn't German. It wasn't any of these modern terms today. What if you couldn't call yourself a Jew? What did you have to call yourself? You had to call yourself a Greek. Learn the Greek language, take on Greek names, Latin names, and hence, going back to this here, that it is also difficult to identify Jewish soldiers, many of whom had Greek and Latin names, and we understand now why they had those Greek and Latin names, because of their forefathers and the great Hellenization period that took place. It says, unless they are specifically identified as Jews or found in a Jewish context, such as dedicatory inscriptions from a synagogue. Right, like you have the example of Tiberius, Julius, Alexander. He knew he was an Israelite. They knew he was a Jew. But the problem was that he did not practice, the rites and the so-called quote-unquote religious customs of Israel. He preferred the heathen's way more, even though he knew he was a Jew. And he was from an equestrian type family. He was from a well-to-do family. But he desired the ways of the Greeks and the Romans more than his own. But he knew he was a Jew, and it's stated. It says, nonetheless, by using a variety of sources from the period, it is possible to appreciate the depth and breadth of Jewish service in the Roman legions from the time of Caesar down to early 5th century. See? From the time of Caesar to the early 5th century. So that whole time period there, you had Jakes in the Roman military. Hence, you have your Corneliuses. And remember, the Jews in Jerusalem had nothing to do with Jake that didn't deal with the law, statutes, commandments, the high holy days, so on and so forth. They shunned them. This is why Cornelius told Peter, how is it that thou being a Jew, comest unto me, something along those lines, for the Jews had no dealings with another nation. When you go to that word other nation, it goes to the Greek word aluphalos, which means another tribe. Because they weren't dealing with they didn't accept Jake back then. Once you fell away, that was it. There was no hope for you. And this is why Yahushua had to come on the scene and do what he did to bring back all of Israel, because the promise would be sure to all the seed. And that all seed is the promised seed, which is any seed that came out of the loins of Jacob, those are the ones to receive the promise. It says there were Jews who served as simple foot soldiers, influential generals like Tiberius, Julius, Alexander, and the Jewish military units such as the Regi and Messeni Judei, which is the same thing as the sons of Israel in Caesar's service. Regardless of their relationship to Orthodox Jewish communities of the time, the service of Roman Jews in the imperial armed forces must be recognized. In the year 69, the Roman province of Judea was consumed by a 3-year rebellion that pitted Jewish zealots against the authority of the emperor of the house of Herod. Not only was the revolt a destabilizing factor in the eastern regions of the empire, but it has also posed a significant challenge to the new emperor, Vespasian. In order to quell the Jewish revolt in his eastern marches, Vespasian resolved to send an army under the command of his son Titus, with explicit orders to crush the insurrection. Although the emperor's young son showed exceptional talent and tact for leadership, he lacked the military experience deemed necessary for a Roman general. Therefore, the emperor was forced to choose an able commander capable of assisting Titus in the Judean expedition. A great number of prestigious military men were available for the post, including Annius Vinicianus, son-in-law to the famed general Corbulo, but Vespasian made the unlikely choice of an Alexandrian Jew named Tiberius Julius Alexander to spearhead the Roman army in its effort to thwart the Jewish uprising. The emperor's decision was to prove fortuitous, as not only did Tiberius Alexander coordinate a Roman victory in Judea, but he also became Titus' trusted advisor and may have even eventually reached the rank of Praetorian prefect. All right, so this whole situation of the Ark of Titus, no mention of Tiberius Julius Alexander. When you read the history or research the history, they always give credit to Titus as being the one that took this down, but he was a very inexperienced general, and it took an Israelite to quell the violence in Israel, in Jerusalem. All right. Now, it mentioned here the authority of the emperor and house of Herod, right? Now, you know what? Let's do this. I'll come back to this. But remember, we read here that you had many of these Israelites that had Greek and Latin names, right? So let's do this. Let's go to Romans 16. And this is a letter, or part of a letter, which the Apostle Paul was giving shout outs to Israelites, but they happened to have Greek and Latin names. Romans 16:1, I commend unto you Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of the church, which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord as becometh saints. Why? Because she's an Israelite. And that you assist her in whatsoever business she have need of you, for she hath been a succorer or a helper of many, and I myself also. Greek what? Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers in Yahushai. Now, Priscilla and Aquila were both Israelites. You know? Let's go real quick to Acts chapter 18. Chapter 18 and 1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth and found a certain Jew named Aquila. But wait a minute, isn't Aquila a Greek name? Why is this Jew, why does he have a Greek name? Aquila means eagle, in Greek. Why does he have a Greek name if he's a Jew? If he's an Israelite, named Aquilus, an eagle, a Jew of Pontus, a tent maker, convert to Yahushai, companion and ally of Paul, and propagating Christianity. See, and this right there says Israelite, an Israelite. This destroys, that whole, there's no difference between Jew or Greek, argument that's talking about heathens. No, right here you have a Jew with a Greek name. You had other Israelites that had Greek names, but they spoke the Greek language and they were, following the Greek customs. That's what it's talking about. That's the great mystery of the Gentiles. All right. Priscilla, right, who have for my life laid down their own necks, unto whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles, which are the Israelite foreigners. Likewise greet the church that is in their house. Salute my well-beloved Epaenetus, who is the first fruits of Achaia unto Yahushai. So wait a minute, another Greek name. Greet Mary, that's a Hebrew name, who bestowed much labor on us. Salute Andronicus and Junia. These are Greek names, Latin names. My kinsmen, see? So you had a lot of Israelites back then with these names. And when we understand that history, then we understand the reasons for the scripture saying that there's no difference between Jew or Greek. Dude, how many times are you going to say the same thing? I mean, what are you? Are you a robot? Are you a robot? Are you a robot? Is that all you got to say? My goodness. And my fellow prisoners who are of note among the apostles, who also were in Yahushua before me, greet Amplius, my beloved in the Lord. Salute Urbane. So these are all Latin and Greek names. Our help in Yahushua. And Stachys, my beloved. Salute Apelles, which sounds almost like Apollos. You don't have the... I tried to give you a wrench last time. I don't know what happened. Here we go. Try that on for size, my brother. You should have it. Let me know if you got the... Let me know if you got the... Oh, this is one of them demons. Let me know if you got the... What you call it? Let me know if you got the wrench. I gave you a wrench. Let me know if you got it. Because I added you as a moderator, but I don't see the... Okay, you should have it. You should have the... Okay, you got it, Elder Manatazak, but you could block them whenever you're ready. I gave you the wrench, so use it. There you go. All right, so moving on. Salute Apelles, approved in Yahushua. Salute them which are of our established household. Salute Herodian, my kinsman. And this is key because this is an Israelite with the name of Herodian. You had Israelites with the name of Herod. I was going to save this for later, but you also had something known as the Herodians. So when we go here, Matthew 22:16, and they sent unto him their disciples with the Herodians, right? So most people would think that those are Edomites. Those are the Edomites. That's Herod's army, the Edomites. Saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of the Most High in truth, neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. And you have it 3 different times. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Now remember, they despised Herod and the Edomites. So they would not have, any dealings with these Edomites unless they had to do some type of business, like when they would go before Herod because he was a king. But as far as these Herodians here, they were one of the sects of Israel. Like you had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the lawyers, the scribes. They were all a part. This is funny. You know what I just thought about when you said this? Thought about when Spawn first got his power. He said, hell yeah. So this was another sect, of Israelites, but they just happened to be called Herodians. You had Pharisees, you had Sadducees, you had scribes, you had lawyers, and you had the Herodians. Now, when we go here, right, to the Bible study tools, it says Herodians, a Jewish political party who sympathized with the Herodian rulers. So they were Israelites that were sympathetic to the Herodian rulers. They were ass lickers. Like when we go to the book of Matthew 2, right? Matthew 2 is a perfect example of, Master, we sick? Master, what we gonna do about these guys? Matthew 2:1. It says, now when Yahushua was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now listen to what happened. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled. He got nervous. And all Jerusalem with him. Because you had Uncle Tom, Master, how is there another king but you, Master? Remember that Jake said, we have no other king but Caesar. Aha. So these Herodians were a Jewish political party who sympathized with the Herodian rulers in their general policy of government and in the social customs which they introduced from Rome. They were at one with the Sadducees in holding the duty of submission to Rome. See? So these were Uncle Tom, well, not Uncle Tom, they were Sambos. These were step and fetchits. These were the pacifists of the time. These were your Jesse Jacksons and your Martin Luther Kings and your different, Slick Do, Al Sharpton, and the rest of them individuals back then coming back to keep Jake in line under the Edomite rulers and of supporting the Herods on the throne. And it goes on to say the same thing here, The party among the Jews are supporters of the Herodian family. It pretty much says the same thing, all right? Because remember, they were sympathetic, so they were known as the Herodians. All right? Now, when we read, let's bring this up here. We read that it was not lawful to profess yourself to be a Jew, so you had to call yourself Greek, and that's why you had the Greek and Roman names. Now, when we go to the book of 2 Maccabees 4:9, it says, beside this, he promised to assign 150 more. This was dealing with Jason. If he might have license to set up a place for exercise and for the training of the youth in the fashion of the heathen. This is all part of the Hellenization period. And to write them of Jerusalem by the name of Antiochians. So you had a group of Israelites that were calling themselves Antiochians that were also Israelites, but they were calling themselves by the name of Antiochians. Just like you had Herodians, which were Israelites that upheld the Herodian dynasty. Well, you had Antiochians who upheld the ways of Antiochus Epiphanes. We read here, Antiochians. It says Antiochus Epiphanes was on the throne of Syria from 175 to 164 BC. His determined policy was to Hellenize his entire kingdom. The greatest obstacle to his ambition was the fidelity of the Jews to their historic religion. Many worldly Hebrews, however, for material advantage, wait a minute, willing to apostatize. So it says many worldly Hebrews. You got your famous Israelites today that are not willing to give up that status. These are some of those same individuals, worldly Hebrews, however, for material advantages, were willing to apostatize. Among them, Jason, the brother of the faithful high priest Onias III, with a large sum of money, gives you the precept. He bribed Antiochus to appoint him high priest in his brother's stead. This office, being since Ezra's time, political as well as religious, made him virtually the head of the nation. He promised on condition the king would permit him to build a Greek gymnasium at Jerusalem to train up the youth of his race in the fashion of the heathen. And this is why you had a lot of, heathens. This is why the Apostle Paul was made, a teacher of the Gentiles, Israelite foreigners, for lack of better words, and to enroll the Hellenized people of Israel as Antiochians. An example to give all Jews who would adopt Greek customs and the Greek religion the rights and privileges of citizens of Antioch. All right. The granting of this request made Jason the head of the Greek party at Jerusalem. So this was a Greek party at Jerusalem, and you had the higher ups, which was Jason. Just like you go during the time of Yahushua, you had the Herodians. The Herodians were a top group, a top sect, like the Pharisees, Sadducees, so on and so forth. It was no different back then. So all of this ties together with the lesson. There's no difference between Jew nor Greek, but you have to understand that history in order to get the mystery. So going back here to this Sons of Israel and Caesar's service, it says, despite the outstanding military career of this Alexandrian Jew, because that's another thing too. Matter of fact, let's go real quick to Acts 6. Acts 6:1. It says, and in those days, when the number of disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now this, you read this, that's white people and Jake. They were fighting back, because it was inequality. There were biases and prejudice going on back then. Jake didn't like the white people. No, these Grecians were Israelites, but they were distinguished from the Hellenized ones, in a sense of the ones that were totally Hellenized, the Jews that were totally Hellenized, spoke the Greek language and kept the Greek customs, religious rites, so on and so forth, ate pork. These Jews that were known as Grecians, they didn't keep the customs, they just spoke the language, but they still kept the customs of their forefathers, the Israelites. And when we look up the word Grecians is Hellenistas, which a Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs of or the worship of the Greeks. No, it's not. And use the Greek tongue. No, it's not talking about that. This would be the Hellen. It says, used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. This is the definition. This part here is not talking about that. The ones who imitate the manners and customs of and the worship of the Greeks and spoke their tongue, those would be known as the Hellen. All right, the Hellen. The Hellenistas were separated not by language but by their actions. They were still keeping the customs of their forefathers. They were just speaking a different language. That's it. So they went off here. Okay, so going back, when we go further down here within the same chapter, let's see, in the 8th verse, and Stephen, which was the top man that was set up over the business of the tables to make sure that the distribution was being done equally, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Right, because he was a devout Israelite, and the Lord gave him power to do great things. The revolution is passed through. What the hell are you talking about? The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Come on, man. Go eat some Chex, with some, grass-fed milk or something. Something wrong with you. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines. Right, the Libertines were those that were freed, by, I believe that was Pompey. These were Israelites. And Cyrenians, because you had Cyrenians, which were Israelites that were in northern Africa. Like you had Simon the Cyrenian, which helped Yahushua with a cross. He was an Israelite that was calling himself Cyrenian because of where he lived. And what? Alexandrians. And of them, of Cilicia and of Asia, disputing with Stephen. Right, so these were Israelites that were cursing Stephen out. And the reason why we went here is because of the word Alexandrians. Alexandrius, a native or resident of Alexandria in Egypt, but they were Israelites. This is why it says here, despite the outstanding military career of this Alexandrian Jew, because you had a large community of Israelites in Alexandria. You had a large community of Israelites in Cyrene, which was northern Africa. All right? All in that region, you had a lot of Israelites that spoke Greek, but they kept the Israelite customs because they were Israelites. His name and his legacy are largely unknown outside a small circle of specialists. Likewise, the participation of Jews in the Roman military is a topic that is underemphasized or frankly ignored by historians. Why? Because the majority of them had Greek and Latin names, so they were not included as being Israelites. This is why today you'll read books like Romans 16 and other chapters where the Apostle Paul shouts out or speaks about certain individuals with Greek or Latin names, and automatically the person reading will paint them, the people, as being so-called white people, Greeks. They're not. They're Israelites. Most often, scholars quote the exemptions from military service granted to Jews at Ephesus and Delos, or elaborate on the difficulties that Sabbath observance and dietary laws pose to Jewish men interested in serving under the imperial flag. When the issue of Jewish service in the Roman army is addressed, it is not without a certain degree of skepticism, and Roman Jews in imperial service often cast in light of renegades or apostates. Yeah, in some cases. But in other cases, you had those Israelites that didn't give a shit about their observances of being an Israelite. Hence, Tiberius Julius Alexander. Perfect example. He didn't care for his religious beliefs and the things that were given to him of the Lord. He cared more about serving the Caesars, and Rome than he did about serving the Most High. Thus, without any documentation of sources, Scarf states that Jews in the Roman army were descended from the bodyguard of the Emeseni and Judean royal families who had intermarried and become pagans. Right, and they had become pagans. We read about that in 2 Maccabees. You could read about it in 1 Maccabees, the first chapter, the 11th verse. It says, in those days when they're out of Israel, wicked men. So these were wicked Judas blood goats among Jake, that said that who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. These were sellouts, Sambos. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the custom of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised. This is twofold. They made themselves uncircumcised because they actually sewed the foreskin back on the penis, but also because they made themselves uncircumcised in following the customs of these nations, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. These were wicked Israelites. Okay? So they became pagans. Smallwood states that military service was always bound to cause difficulties for the Jews of the diaspora because of their dietary laws, but these didn't give a shit about that, which made their inclusion in Gentile units impracticable. So what's the deal with Tiberius Julius Alexander? It's a fact that he's an Israelite, and it's a fact that you had Israelites that were Hellenized, that took on Greek names, that called themselves Greeks, that spoke the Greek language, that followed the Greek customs. So what are you talking about? And their inability to carry out the duties on the Sabbaths. Applebaum claims that Jews in the Roman army were renegades. Not all of them. And Tiberius Julius Alexander is often recast as an apostate, even when it is acknowledged that there is no evidence of this fact. He is an apostate. Because he would not have taken action against his own people in 70 AD if he wasn't. It says the lack of recognition given to Jewish soldiers who served in the Roman military stems primarily from three main issues: the dearth of inscriptions, meaning that there was a lack of writings about them, and manuscripts specifically addressing Jews in the Roman military. Right, and that was all done, the Lord set it up. Because, this is a great mystery, the mystery of the Gentiles or the Israelite foreigners. The inability to recognize Jews with Greek or Latin names unless they are identified as such. See? And the tendency of many scholars to rely on rabbinic works in order to reconstitute normal Jewish practices in the Roman world. You had a lot of Israelites that forsook that. As a larger corpus of Jewish inscriptions and artifacts from the ancient period has become available, it has become clear that the observance of Judaism in the Roman world was much more variegated, meaning it was a lot of variety to it than previously supposed. Authors like Levine and Schwartz have now challenged the assertions of prior historians, claiming that Jewish practice in the imperial period encompassed a broad range of religious activity, from the orthodoxy of the rabbinic academics to the syncretism of Jews who had Latin names and employed pagan motifs in synagogal decoration. Yeah, because and you even have Constantine, who adopted Christianity as the religion of his empire, but he was still a pagan, and he incorporated a lot of those pagan beliefs into the religion. That's why today you have Christianity that is deeply steeped in paganism. This is why they believe in the virgin birth and other things of that nature, which are from the origins are strictly pagan. With these facts in mind, the prospect of active Jewish participation in the military becomes tangible, and upon careful examination of primary sources, it is possible to demonstrate the profound extent to which Roman Jews operated in the imperial army. And it goes on and on. It's not that many pages, so those of you that are interested in reading more, you can. I put this in the description box. What I'll do once again, I did it already, but I'll do it again because I forgot to put this in the description box. I'll put this video in the text, the live comment board, and this is Blake Griffin playing a commercial of Cornelius. This is a football. I believe this is a basketball or football, one of those commercials, and he actually played the Roman centurion Cornelius of the scriptures, and they happened to get a Jake to play him. And at the beginning of it, they called him Blake. He said, no, Cornelius. Because these devils know that Cornelius was a so-called black man. He was just steeped into the Roman military, but he was devout. This is why the angel was sent to him. He feared the Most High. So he was a type that didn't break the Sabbath, and the Lord made it so to where he was able to still function in the Roman military. All right. So yeah, this has been neither Jew nor Greek. And the reason why there was no difference between the Jew or the Greek is because they were both Israelites. The only barrier was the language barrier. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.